You're a man of faith. What happens to a nation when it gains power but loses its moral compass?
Inevitably, it destroys itself from within, as you've said. You can go even more recently to empires such as the British Empire. The British Empire, the sun never set on that empire. But once it lost its moral and spiritual basis, once it became an empire built on slavery, built on the subjugation of the Indian subcontinent, the poisoning of China with opium through the Wars, outsourcing what was once a broad imperial goal to the East India Trade Companies and the exploitation of natives here in the North American continent, within 100 years they became a shell of themselves, and now the British Empire can barely defend its own island, let alone defend an entire global empire. Similarly for America, I grew up much like you in the South. I grew up in Harris County, Georgia. I was a dyed-in-the-wool, 3-day-a-week Christian conservative, moral majority, Crystal Cathedral, all those things. Grew up with Pat Buchanan. My dad gave money to Jimmy Swaggart every single month. But that version of the Republican Party no longer exists. And that version of the Democratic Party no longer exists. That a party that is based on morals and values and expectations is gone. And because of that, we have a public policy which is now simply built on, as you said, team sports. What can I do to destroy the other team? Not what can I do to uplift mine? What can I do to ensure that I have 100% power and never have to compromise? I think there's something wrong with America when Thomas Massey isn't conservative enough to be a Republican and Joe Manchin isn't progressive enough to be a Democrat, where there's no room for dissension, no room for independent thought. Everyone simply has to be in lockstep with leadership, and that leadership is controlled by corporations as opposed to being controlled by the moral values of America. So I think the American people have to start taking this power back. Power should come from America to Washington, not from Washington to America. And when the American people see that we're spending almost $2 billion on a slush fund to pay off political cronies, when they see we're spending hundreds of $millions on ballrooms, when we have these massive giveaways and programs in a bloated federal government that has taken over all the areas of once family, church, community once held, you can see that the American people on both sides are tired of what is going on, and we have to rail our politicians back in, particularly now when we're seeing politicians now gerrymandering to get the votes that they want, and the politicians are now picking their voters instead of the voters picking their politicians. I think we're in the place now for a spiritual awakening that may cleanse this political system that we currently have and return us to a more moral and just nation built on biblical values and biblical principles, not just the convenient ones, but all of the biblical values and biblical principles, including being kind to your neighbors, feeding the poor and hungry, reaching out to those who are downtrodden, and believing in those principles that made us a great nation before.